You're listening to the Otis Jiry channel. My Four Lost Years, A True Story by Richard E. Harding, performed by Otis Jiry. Inscribed on a beam in the vast attic is the year 1792, the time of the Napoleonic War in the reign of George III of England. This wooden United Reformed Church was built on a small patch of land in the corner of a field which today is the village playing field. The church had later additions, a half-tower to the rear, which contained the vestry below and the choir and organ gallery above in semicircular areas, and in Victorian times a front brick wall including stairs, left and right up to the side galleries, completed the church as it stands today with a magnificent circular rose window illuminating the attic. This wall has a pinnacle at the apex, which must weigh a half a ton, and was found to be just sitting there under its own weight and dubious integrity. It could have plummeted down at any time on anyone congregating around the entrance below. Another large decorative structure to the right was also in danger of falling. Sometime in the 1960s, the church was abandoned because it was deemed structurally unsound and left to dereliction, and its small graveyard cleared of its ancient weather-worn monuments, with some positioned up against a perimeter wall. But they left the bodies there. In its early years, it was soon overfull with bodies. Finally, many pushed under the church walls until no space remained. We discovered that we shared our new purchase with around 80 bodies. Unfortunately, none of us are religious or superstitious in any way. An overflow graveyard was established next to the one used by the village church and set in a countryside field about a mile away. We had learned that a derelict church was up for sale in 1993 from our daughter, who worked for the estate agent for the sale. She thought Mom and Dad would be interested, and she was right. Clearly, the low asking price reflected the resident population. What met our eyes was a big, derelict building covered in ivy, set in a severely overgrown graveyard. A local man told us that most of the gravestones had been smashed with sledgehammers and buried, including a large monument over a vault similar to the one that remained to the far left of the entrance, which was constructed from large limestone panels, each inscribed with the names of its occupants. A triangular four-sided pyramid sat on top of the vault that contained the bodies of 11 children, if I remember correctly. At those times, infant mortality was high, and one baby was interred beneath the wall at the front right-hand corner, with its little gravestone, marking the child's name and age, leaning at an angle as it should have not been there. 4 former vicars' remains were buried beneath the main hall floor, with stone wall plaques commemorating them affixed to the walls on either side. Another vicar was under a long moss and lichen-covered memorial stone laid flat between the front entrance and the vault monument. Our recently purchased derelict building was not in a good state, but salvageable and an exciting project which our builders agreed to take on despite the limited funds. Part of the vast roof system, which included a double-hipped roof that had been vandalized, letting in water, and most of the ornate arched side windows had been smashed, inviting in the ivy like invading triffids. The blackened remains of the pulpit was the result of at least one of the fires, with its barely existing little charcoal-encrusted twisting stairway. It was almost as if the prevailing vicar had been struck by a thunderbolt for blasphemy during a sermon. The high ceiling above showed scoured evidence of the fire hoses, spurting intrusion, which saved the building from a fiery demise. Most days, school children would pass along the footpath across the playing field, past the abandoned church, as this was the direct pathway linking the village houses to the college the other side of the road. Some youngsters, breaking in after school on dark winter evenings, would spook each other out. One young girl told us she was quite sure she saw a face in the window one night. The central main hall of the church was strewn higgledy-piggledy, with perhaps half a dozen remaining pews and random pieces of broken church furniture which had not been stolen. Between the choir seats, either side, was the empty platform where the vast organ once stood, it having been vandalized long ago with very few remaining pieces lying around. High above, in the hall, is a central circular vent through which the flow of air could be controlled by two large wooden door flaps on the attic side, adjusting by pulling on ropes. We learned that the church safe had been found in a nearby brook and was now lying next to the church wall. We were able to smash it open to reveal a boring box of pens and a wad of soaked and hopelessly stuck-together Bibles or hymn books. Despite all of this desolation and destruction, we had decided to sell up our suburban semi and buy it for £20,000. The remainder of our house sale would pay for its conversion into our dream home. At least that was the plan. The church was known locally as the Church with the Bees, and the builders later found a truly massive, part-active bee's nest beneath the floor where the organ once stood, extending back from its entrance in the wall perhaps 6 feet into the choir gallery. It had to be eliminated by extermination in order for work to continue. We learned that a rich Asian gentleman had bought the church at one time, intent on converting it into a rest home, but for some reason had not gone ahead with it. Apparently, he had often been seen visiting the church in his Rolls-Royce, driving it up the path by the side of the playing field by the long wall which led to the isolated church. He had drawn up plans which were still kept at the city council offices, which I used as the basis of my conversion drawings, which I submitted for approval after weeks of work on huge sheets of paper, including a nice drawing of how I wanted the hall to look with a proposed new staircase. As I remember, there were 2 or 3, perhaps 4 sheets required to present, each with 6 copies. It was gratefully accepted, and we secured the sale. We put all our furniture and belongings into a shipping container at a storage facility in a nearby village and bought a large, old, and cheap seaside caravan from an advertiser. It was parked at a farm, and after we bought it, we heard that the young farm owner had killed himself, leaving his lovely wife and daughters, whom we had met, very sad. But we were certain it wasn't because we'd bought this caravan. It was towed into the weed-cleared graveyard prior to us arriving on the first dreary, spooky hour of 1994, before 1 a.m., January the 1st. The builder who was to do the conversion had kindly lent us his van for us to move our essentials, including our 4 young children still at home and our 4 cats. What had we done? Our children must have thought we were mad, but then they already knew that by now. 10 rooms were built as I had designed them, dividing up the spaces beneath and above the 4 surrounding galleries, and the hall floorboards were relaid minus the scores of slots where the long pews were originally inserted. The soil floor beneath revealed the positions of the 4 original post holes for the first wooden structure, but no signs of the 4 vicars' graves. The semicircular vestry was to be our kitchen, with a sun lounge in the choir gallery above, with more than a 180-degree view across much of the surrounding countryside and playing field. During the complete reconstruction of the vestry floor onto the soil beneath, strange small arches in the low walls of the brickyard foundation were revealed. Digging into the soil beneath these arches, we found a human vertebrae. I know this because I took it to Cambridge University's anthropology unit for identification. It was the vertebrae of a teenager, Perhaps this additional part of the church had been built over graves rather than moving them into an already overpopulated graveyard. We dug further down, but found nothing else. We thought we might find the skull. But why weren't the bones inside a coffin? Visions of murdered choir boys invaded my mind. During our 10 months squashed together in the caravan from hell and suffering acute cabin fever, our two elder boys decided to sleep outside in our trailer tent. I suffered another heart attack and began croaking like a demon for breath. My wife and one of my boys drove me to the hospital. With an erratic heartbeat, they had to defibrillate me back to a normal rhythm. I had a further tachycardia event after we moved in, and again had to be shocked out of it in hospital. This was the beginning of things going horribly wrong. It was November 1994 when the workmen finally left, 10 months later, and I spent the first night in our new home to see what it was like before we all moved in with our furniture and belongings from storage. We had a daunting task ahead with acres of freshly plastered walls and doors to paint. My physical and mental state by now prevented me from doing much, and my severe, lifelong, anxiety-fed OCD was starting to get much worse, and I was hardly able to cope. It was as if all the stress of the preceding 2 years had reached a crescendo. Then the spooky day arrived, when I heard an enormous crash reverberate through the building, just as if a huge wrecking ball had hit the front facade brickwork. Oddly, I can't remember if the others heard it. Then one evening, as I looked up into the starry night sky above our row of very tall elm trees, I saw 3 very bright stars, except they were not stars. I called my wife and 2 of my boys to come and look. We saw one of the lights moving toward another stationary light, to then shoot off at an impossible speed, and the other lights simply disappeared. This was a typical description of UFO lights in the sky, and we had witnessed it for ourselves. However, only I seemed to realize the importance of what we had just seen. They were not small and nearby, but appeared to be large, very bright objects but a mile away. I reasoned they must have wanted to be seen, otherwise they would have switched off their lights. We often heard cars arrive which did not exist, crunching along on newly built gravel roads beside our house, which stretched 100 yards or so to the village road. It was rather disturbing for us not to be able to explain these enigmatic events. One night I heard a disturbance alongside the church beside my bedroom. Outside, I confronted an escapee from a nearby secure mental hospital in the next village. I know this because he nervously told us in not so many words. He was caught in the act of trying to steal my old push bikes. He reached in his jacket, and I thought for a dreadful second or two that he was going to produce a knife. This may have been his intention, but he didn't continue. Finally, we persuaded him to walk back across the playing field in the direction of the hospital. Our main bedroom was next to a discovered small lower room containing the coal-fired boiler, a huge, rusty bulk of a thing. Heat was transported along floor ducts, which opened into 2 grids in the main hall floor in Victorian times. These Art Nouveau-type patterned cast-iron grids, about 4 foot by 5, were now displayed at the newly designed front porch area windows, either side of the double doors. Outside were 4 white 12-inch hexagonal columns, around 10 feet high, supporting an ornate roof with a row of little arched windows to the rear. During the previous years, I had been taking a strong prescription dose of Ativan, benzodiazepine medication, originally to combat my anxiety-driven OCD, to enable me to complete my final year of my Bachelor of Science. But I had become addicted to the drug with horrible side effects without any warning from my doctor. They changed my personality into a dislikable, intolerable person, and now my heart condition was worsening and I could no longer cope. I had a severe bedridden nervous breakdown, which was to continue for 4 years, from 1996 until 2000. Suicidal, I became Rasputin-esque in appearance, with long, black-length, greasy hair and a straggly beard, existing alone in bed in one room, rarely seen outside of it. I remember nothing of those years, under the covers, unable to do anything, and with no one helping me or calling a doctor. OCD had truly beaten me into submission. I couldn't watch a TV, or listen to a radio, or put on any music, nor could I read. The curtains remained half closed, as I was unable to move them. No one came in to see me except my wife, with a tray of food, drink, and my pills each day. She would never stay to speak with me, and my friends abandoned me. Why did no one else realize I was missing all those years? To this day, 20 years later, I still don't know why, and I was never able to bring myself to ask why. It all seemed almost too terrible to know. But one thing I am sure of is that my wife wanted me to die. After I had recovered at South London's Bethlehem Hospital, here's what she said. "You're ugly. You're evil. You're back from the dead." It was as if the old building had affected her reasoning of my mental state of health. Was she suggesting demonic possession as if it would have been thought of those hundreds of years ago? Our church house dream had proved to be anything but, as I began to find the building oppressive and sinister. I must have slept most of the time in a sort of hibernation, and was continually suicidal. I was the blackened embryo in a cotton coffin, as I was to later describe myself to a psychotherapist at the hospital, and described in my book, OCD, A Life in Torment. Someone, I don't know who, found out about the South London Hospital, which specialized in anxiety disorders, including obsessive-compulsive disorder, and I made a remarkable recovery at the hospital hostel over a couple of months, despite regular home visits, when I was ignored by nearly everyone and had no support whatsoever. This attitude towards me continued until we decided to divorce and managed to sell our church house despite a lot of work yet to be done. It was always cold and impossible to heat. We divorced shortly after moving out to our separate new homes. I was very glad to be out of that nightmarish place. During these years following, I still have nightmares about that church, envisioning it as being much bigger, with myriad dusty labyrinth rooms at all levels and directions, packed with my hoarded items in various attics in the building set in large, undulating, wooded grounds. This place where 4 years of my life were lost.